He was a billionaire, a man of influence, and a husband with secrets. But those secrets didn't just cost him his marriage, they cost him his life. Michael Sinclair was a name that commanded power. From his towering business empire to his lavish lifestyle, he was the epitome of success. A self-made billionaire who rose from humble beginnings in Kingston, Jamaica, to build a financial empire spanning the Caribbean. He had the wealth, the status, and a wife who embodied grace and sophistication. But beneath the polished image, there was another Michael, one whose hunger for control extended far beyond the boardroom. For years, Michael led a life of excess, indulging in a world of secrets he thought he could keep buried. His marriage to Camille Sinclair was a picture of elegance on the surface, but behind closed doors, their relationship was anything but perfect. Camille was loyal, poised, and ever the devoted wife, but she was not blind. She knew of the whispers, the affairs, the fleeting romances that her husband entertained across the Caribbean. She had chosen silence over scandal. Until one day, silence was no longer an option. One woman, Ava Mendoza, was different. Young, ambitious, and determined not to be another passing fling, Ava had no intention of playing the role of a disposable mistress. She wanted more. And when Michael refused to give her what she wanted, she made sure he would pay the price. A single confession was all it took to shatter the carefully constructed illusion of Michael's marriage. Camille had tolerated indiscretions before, but this betrayal, this exposure, was unforgivable. She was no longer the patient wife standing in the shadows. Now, she was a woman scorned, and she would not be humiliated. Divorce was never an option, not for Camille, not for the Sinclair name. But revenge, that was an entirely different matter. And as the walls of deception began to crumble around Michael, a deadly plan was already being set in motion. On a fateful night, under the guise of reconciliation, Michael Sinclair walked into what he believed was a private meeting. But what awaited him was not forgiveness. It was execution. By the time the night was over, Michael was dead, and all fingers pointed to the woman he had once betrayed. Ava Mendoza, the mistress who refused to be forgotten, was now in handcuffs, accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit. But was Ava truly the mastermind? Or was she just another pawn in a much larger, more calculated game? One where the real orchestrator had already vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions, deception, and a trail of blood. What seemed like an open-and-shut case would unravel into one of the most chilling crime stories in Jamaica's history. A case of power, betrayal, and revenge, where the real killer was hiding in plain sight. Before Michael Sinclair was a billionaire, before his name became synonymous with wealth and power, he was just another ambitious young man with a relentless drive to succeed. Born into a modest household in Kingston, Jamaica, Michael was no stranger to hardship. His childhood was marked by struggle, limited opportunities, financial strain, and the constant reminder that survival meant fighting for every inch of progress. But for Michael, survival wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted it all. From an early age, he understood one thing: money was power, and power was everything. He started small, working long hours, making connections, and learning from those who had already carved their paths in the world of business. He had a mind for numbers, an instinct for deals, and an unshakable confidence that made people believe in him. By the time he reached his 20s, he had already begun laying the foundation of what would become the Sinclair Financial Group, an investment firm that would later dominate industries across the Caribbean. Real estate, banking, international trade. Michael had his hands in everything. And with every new deal, every strategic move, his fortune multiplied. But Michael wasn't just building an empire, he was crafting an image. He knew that power wasn't just about money, it was about presence. He surrounded himself with the elite, attended exclusive galas, and made sure his name was whispered in the same circles as royalty and political leaders. He became the man everyone wanted to know, the figure that commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. And standing beside him through it all was Camille. Camille Sinclair was the perfect complement to Michael's world. Graceful, intelligent, and effortlessly charming, she exuded the kind of quiet strength that turned heads without a single word. Their love story was one that people envied, at least, from the outside. She had met Michael in his early years, long before he had reached the heights of his success. She had seen his ambition, his hunger for greatness, and she had believed in him. Through the years of tireless work and ruthless competition, Camille had been his anchor, the steady force behind his rise to power. Together, they became the picture of success. Their marriage was admired, their wealth celebrated. They lived in a world of luxury, multimillion-dollar mansions, private yachts, vacations in the most exotic corners of the world. To the public, they were untouchable. A power couple, the kind that seemed destined for nothing but greatness. But power, as we know, can be both a blessing and a curse. Michael had built his empire on control of his business, his public image, and, for a long time, his marriage. But there was one thing he never quite mastered: self-restraint. The same confidence that made him a formidable businessman also made him reckless in his personal life. He was never satisfied with just success. He needed more. And when it came to women, more was never enough. For years, he operated in the shadows of his own creation. Extramarital affairs were not just an indulgence, they were a routine. Women came and went, models, socialites, even close acquaintances of Camille's. He was careful, discreet. Or so he thought. Camille had always known, but she chose to look the other way, choosing silence over confrontation. Perhaps she believed that as long as he returned home to her, their marriage remained intact. Perhaps she convinced herself that what they had built was too powerful to be undone by fleeting desires. But the thing about unchecked ambition is that it blinds you. Michael had spent his life outmaneuvering competitors, predicting market trends, and ensuring that no one could ever get the upper hand on him. But in his personal life, he underestimated one simple truth: when you play with fire, you eventually get burned. It wasn't the affairs themselves that would threaten everything he had built, it was who he chose to betray. And among the many women who had entered Michael's world, one would change the course of his life forever. One would refuse to be discarded like the rest. One would set in motion a chain of events that not even Michael Sinclair, with all his wealth and power, could escape. For a man like Michael Sinclair, control was everything. In business, in marriage, in the way the world saw him, his life was carefully managed, every detail polished to perfection. But behind closed doors, there was another life, one carefully constructed in secrecy. One filled with whispered promises, hidden messages, and fleeting moments stolen in the dark. A life where loyalty meant nothing, and indulgence had no limits. Michael's affairs were not impulsive mistakes. They were calculated, methodical. He knew how to keep them hidden, knew which women to choose, women who would not speak, who understood the rules. To them, he was a powerful man who could change their lives, and in return, all he asked was discretion. He had penthouses in Kingston, private villas in the Bahamas, luxurious suites in the Dominican Republic. Locations carefully selected, far from the eyes of his wife, his business partners, and the journalists who followed his every move. There were always women. Some were brief encounters, others lingered a little longer. Some accepted their place, content with expensive gifts and empty promises. But then, there was Ava Mendoza. Ava was different. She was not content to be another forgotten name. Young, stunning, and fiercely ambitious, she had risen from a modest background in the Dominican Republic to become a sought-after model. She had charm, beauty, and a determination that set her apart. And when she met Michael Sinclair, she saw an opportunity, not just for luxury, not just for wealth, but for something more. She wanted status. She wanted to stand beside him, not hide in the shadows. At first, their affair was like the others: private jets, lavish gifts, secret weekends in paradise. But Ava did not play by Michael's rules. She was not the kind of woman to accept being a secret. She wanted to be acknowledged, to be part of his world, not just exist on the outskirts of it. She pushed for more, tested his limits. And for the first time, Michael found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was used to being in control, but with Ava, the balance had shifted. As months passed, her demands grew bolder. She wanted public outings, wanted him to make decisions that extended beyond stolen moments and hidden affairs. But there was one thing she wanted above all else: his marriage to Camille to end. And when she asked, she expected an answer she had already convinced herself would come. But Michael was not a man who bowed to pressure. He had spent his life controlling his narrative, ensuring that no one, not his competitors, not his associates, not even the women in his life, had the power to dictate his choices. His marriage was not about love, it was about image, about the empire he had built alongside Camille. Divorce was not an option. Camille was not an option. And most importantly, Ava was never meant to be anything more than a secret. When Michael finally refused, he expected anger, perhaps even a brief moment of defiance before Ava accepted her place like all the others. What he did not expect was what came next. Ava was not like the others. And unlike the women before her, she would not be ignored. If Michael would not give her the life she wanted, she would take something from him that he could never undo, his reputation. She did not threaten. She acted. One by one, Michael's carefully guarded secrets began to unravel. It started with whispers, unconfirmed rumors in the social circles of Kingston, quiet speculation among the elite. Then, Ava took it a step further. Anonymous messages sent to reporters, strategically leaked photos, details of affairs that had remained buried for years suddenly brought into the light. But it was not just the affairs she exposed, it was the names. Camille's friends, women from his own business circles, connections that cut deeper than just betrayal. And at the center of it all, the one woman he had never feared losing was now the one who could destroy him. Camille Sinclair had always known about the affairs. She had chosen patience, chosen silence. But silence was no longer possible when the truth was delivered to her doorstep. Not in whispers, not in speculation, but in undeniable, irrefutable proof. This time, Michael had not just betrayed his vows. He had humiliated her, had brought disgrace to their name. And for the first time in their marriage, Camille was not just the wife standing in the background. She was the woman who had been wronged. And she was about to show Michael Sinclair what that meant. Ava had wanted revenge. But in the end, she was not the only woman Michael should have feared. 4 years, Camille Sinclair had perfected the art of silence. She understood the rules of high society, the unspoken agreements between power and discretion. She had learned to smile through betrayal, to stand beside a husband who belonged to everyone but her. But there was one thing she had never learned: how to forgive. When Ava Mendoza came to her, Camille expected nothing more than another desperate woman hoping to be acknowledged. But what she received was something far worse. The evidence was undeniable: pictures, receipts, messages that confirmed everything she had chosen to overlook. It was not just Michael's affairs that were exposed, it was the depth of his deception. And at the center of it all was a betrayal she had never anticipated, not just by her husband, but by someone she had called a friend. Among the names Ava revealed was Gabrielle Lawson, a woman Camille had trusted, someone she had confided in, had shared moments of vulnerability with. The realization struck like a blade to the chest. This was no longer about indiscretions or fleeting affairs. This was humiliation, a calculated destruction of the life she had built. And Camille Sinclair was not a woman who allowed herself to be destroyed. To the outside world, she remained poised, her expression unreadable, her demeanor unshaken. But inside, something had changed. A decision had been made, silent and absolute. Camille had given Michael the best years of her life, had protected his image, had played the role of the perfect wife. Now, she would give him something else. A fate of her own design. Divorce was not an option. To the world, Michael Sinclair was the image of success, a self-made billionaire, a man whose empire was built on control. But behind that success was Camille. She had shaped him, molded him, stood by his side as he climbed to the top. And if she walked away now, she would walk away with nothing. The court would see her as just another wealthy wife asking for a settlement. She would be painted as the victim, but victims were powerless. Camille had never been powerless. She did not want a divorce. She wanted justice, on her own terms. There was only one way to ensure Michael Sinclair would never betray her again. And there was only one way to ensure Ava Mendoza paid for her part in this. The plan was set in motion with precision. Camille was not impulsive. She was deliberate. She had spent years learning patience, and now, she would use it to her advantage. This was not a crime of passion. This was something far more controlled, far more meticulous. Her first step was finding the right man for the job. In the underworld of Kingston, everything had a price. Money could buy silence, could erase mistakes, could turn loyalty into something disposable. And for the right price, it could make someone disappear. Camille reached out through a series of careful connections, ensuring there were no direct ties leading back to her. It took time, but she was willing to wait. And then, she found him, Alexander Zane Morrison, a man whose profession required no sympathy, no hesitation. He had handled problems before. And now, he would handle hers. Their meeting was brief. She was not reckless enough to speak in absolutes, but Zane understood what was being asked of him. There were 2 names, 2 problems, and in a matter of days, there would be none. But Camille was not a woman who left things to chance. She knew Michael better than anyone, his habits, his movements, the way he operated when he thought no one was watching. And so, she created the perfect setup. A secluded villa, an invitation sent to both Michael and Ava, each believing the other had arranged the meeting. It was the kind of setting that left no room for escape, no witnesses, no interruptions. It would happen cleanly, efficiently. And by the time the sun rose, both Michael Sinclair and Ava Mendoza would be nothing more than the past. But what Camille had not accounted for, what no one had accounted for, was that betrayal rarely comes from only one direction. And when the plan was finally set in motion, she would realize that the only thing more dangerous than a man with too much power is a woman with nothing left to lose. The night was carefully chosen, no security, no witnesses, no mistakes. The villa, nestled deep in the Jamaican countryside, stood in eerie silence, its isolation the perfect cover for what was about to unfold. A single invitation had been sent to Michael, another to Ava, both crafted with precision, ensuring they would believe the other had arranged the meeting. Michael, arrogant as always, assumed Ava had finally come to her senses, ready to accept her place in his life, on his terms. Ava, still burning with fury, believed Michael was finally ready to talk, to acknowledge the damage he had done. Neither of them knew they were walking into the end of their story. Camille had spent weeks ensuring every detail was in place. The villa was owned by a shell company, the staff had been given the night off, and the cameras, those that remained, had been tampered with to tell a different story. In the shadows, she waited. She was not alone. Alexander Zane Morrison had done this before. A professional, a man who never hesitated. He had no interest in the emotions behind this job, only the payout that awaited him when it was done. Camille stood beside him, expression unreadable, the weight of what she had orchestrated pressing down on her, but she did not waver. This was not just an act of vengeance. This was control, taken back piece by piece. At precisely 10:45 p.m., the sound of tires crunching against gravel signaled the arrival of Michael Sinclair. The luxury SUV rolled to a stop outside the villa, its headlights cutting through the darkness. He stepped out, his confidence unshaken, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit as if this was nothing more than another one of his secret rendezvous. Moments later, a second car pulled up, Ava Mendoza emerging cautiously, her expression sharp with suspicion. She had played enough games with Michael to know when something didn't feel right. But by the time she realized the trap, it was already too late. The doors of the villa were unlocked, the entryway dimly lit by warm candlelight, a setting meant to disarm, to lower their guard. Michael stepped inside first, glancing around with mild curiosity, his mind still preoccupied with the idea of control. Ava followed, tension thick in her movements, her instincts screaming for her to turn back. And then, the first gunshot tore through the silence. Michael barely had time to react before the second shot followed, striking him square in the chest. The force sent him staggering backward, his breath hitching in shock. He was a man who had spent his life untouchable, powerful beyond measure. And now, he was dying on the floor of a villa he had never planned to leave. Ava's scream cut through the night, a raw, disbelieving sound as she stumbled back, hands shaking, eyes locked onto the man who had once promised her everything. Blood pooled beneath Michael's body, the expensive fabric of his suit darkening, his expression frozen in something between shock and betrayal. He tried to speak, but nothing came, only the slow, painful realization that he would never leave this room alive. And then, silence. Camille stood just beyond the shadows, watching. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no triumph in her posture. This was not about celebration. This was about erasure. Michael was gone, but there was still one loose end to tie up. Ava turned, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. And in that moment of chaos, she became exactly what Camille needed her to be, helpless, vulnerable, and above all, guilty. The plan was never just about Michael's death. It was about ensuring that Ava took the fall. Camille moved quickly. The gun, carefully wiped clean, was placed near Ava's trembling hands. Blood, still warm, smeared across her fingers as she reached out in confusion. She didn't even notice the cameras, the ones Camille had ensured remained untouched, the ones that would capture only what she wanted them to capture. The sirens came faster than expected. Camille had timed the anonymous tip perfectly, ensuring the police would arrive just moments after the deed was done. The flashing red and blue lights reflected against the villa's pristine white walls, illuminating the scene like the final act of a well-rehearsed play. Ava was still in shock when the officers burst through the door. Her hands were stained with Michael's blood, her expression frozen in horror as she looked up at the armed men surrounding her. The words left her lips before she could even think. It wasn't me. But the evidence said otherwise. The gun at her feet, the blood on her hands, the security footage, doctored to show only the moments Camille had allowed. To the world, there was no question. Ava Mendoza had just murdered the most powerful billionaire in Jamaica. As the officers restrained her, as the press caught wind of the arrest, as the world turned its eyes toward the scandal of the decade, Camille Sinclair watched from a distance. Her expression did not change. She did not grieve. She did not gloat. She simply walked away, knowing that, for the first time in years, she was truly free. The case against Ava Mendoza seemed airtight. A young mistress caught at the scene of the crime, blood on her hands, and a murdered billionaire lying lifeless at her feet. The tabloids wasted no time, splashing headlines across front pages. Billionaire slain in jealous rage. Model mistress turns murderer. But while the world watched the scandal unfold, one man wasn't so sure the story added up. Detective Joel Patterson had spent years investigating high-profile cases, but this one felt different. Something about it gnawed at him. He had seen grief before, real grief. He had witnessed women collapse to their knees, begging for answers, clawing at the walls of loss. But Camille Sinclair, her grief was too precise, too measured, as if she were performing a role rather than mourning a husband. The tears were there, but the agony? Missing. The sorrow? Controlled. And that control was exactly what set off alarm bells in his mind. The crime scene itself told a story. But was it the right one? Forensics had confirmed that Michael Sinclair had been shot twice, once in the chest, once in the head. Execution style. Not a crime of passion. Not a lover's quarrel turned deadly. This was calculated, deliberate, professional. Yet, the police had walked into that villa and found only Ava Mendoza, a woman with no history of violence, no prior arrests, and no known access to firearms. And the murder weapon? It was clean. Too clean. No fingerprints. No DNA. As if someone had made sure there wouldn't be. Then there was the footage. Security cameras positioned throughout the property should have captured the full event, yet what the detectives received was conveniently incomplete. The video showed Ava entering the villa. It showed Michael arriving minutes later. And then, static. When the footage resumed, Michael lay dead, and Ava stood over him, shaking, confused, hands covered in blood. The camera angles were suspiciously perfect, never revealing a third presence in the room, never offering any evidence beyond what Camille wanted the world to see. Detective Patterson wasn't buying it. He requested the original security logs. What he found changed everything. There were timestamps missing. Data logs had been altered. A closer examination showed subtle tampering. Someone had cut out key moments. Moments where someone else, someone unseen, had entered that room. Someone who had pulled the trigger before stepping back into the shadows. And then, there was the money. Following the digital trail, Patterson dug into Michael Sinclair's financial records. Offshore accounts, hidden transactions, a meticulous web of wealth that only the most powerful could afford to conceal. But what caught his attention wasn't Michael's finances, it was Camille's. Days before the murder, large sums had been moved to an unknown account in the Cayman Islands. The recipient, a name that meant nothing at first. But after running it through the database, Patterson found his link. Alexander Zane Morrison, a known contract killer. Now, the pieces were shifting. Camille had motive. She had resources. And she had connections to a man capable of making her husband disappear. But there was just one problem. Camille was gone. While the world fixated on Ava Mendoza's trial, Camille Sinclair had left Jamaica. Not quietly, not discreetly, boldly. A first-class ticket to Paris. A suite at a five-star hotel. Shopping sprees captured by paparazzi. She wasn't in hiding. She wasn't grieving. She was celebrating. Camille Sinclair had walked away from the crime of the decade without a scratch, and she knew it. But Patterson wasn't done yet. He issued a warrant, tracking every move Camille made. Paris was just a stop. From there, she moved through Europe, London, Madrid, Monaco, each destination a playground for the wealthy. But Camille wasn't just traveling. She was securing herself. Closing accounts, moving assets, ensuring that by the time the truth caught up to her, there would be nothing left to take. But she underestimated the reach of justice. Interpol was now involved. Camille's name was flagged. Every flight, every hotel, every transaction left a trail. And with every step, the noose tightened. What she thought was freedom was, in reality, a countdown. A matter of time before the past she had tried to erase came crashing back into her world. Back in Jamaica, Patterson worked to strengthen the case. Witnesses were re-examined, phone records dissected, and then, a breakthrough, one Camille hadn't accounted for. An eyewitness. A staff member at the villa, a cleaner, had been paid to take the night off. But before she left, she had seen something, someone. A man arriving at the villa long before Michael and Ava. A man matching the description of Alexander Morrison. She had thought nothing of it at the time, but now, with the case unfolding, she realized what she had seen, and she was willing to testify. With this new piece of evidence, Patterson had what he needed. Camille wasn't just a grieving widow. She was a mastermind. And now, there was enough to bring her back to face the justice she had tried so desperately to outrun. Camille Sinclair had always known how to play the game. She had spent years mastering the art of deception, first as the poised, graceful wife of a billionaire, then as the grieving widow who had seemingly lost everything. But in reality, Camille had lost nothing. She had only gained her freedom. And with that freedom, she intended to build a new life, far away from the chaos she had left behind in Jamaica. Paris welcomed her with open arms. Under a new identity, she slipped seamlessly into the world of the elite. A new name, a new passport, and a fortune still untouched in offshore accounts. She had played her cards well. From the outside, she was just another wealthy woman shopping along the Champs-Élysées, sipping champagne at rooftop lounges, and strolling through art galleries without a care in the world. She had learned to mask any trace of fear. There was no reason to look over her shoulder. In her mind, she had already won. But she had overlooked one thing, the trail of money. No matter how carefully she had plotted her escape, no matter how meticulously she had erased her digital footprint, there was one truth she could not outrun. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every deposit left breadcrumbs leading straight to her. And Detective Joel Patterson, alongside Interpol, was following them. As the investigation in Jamaica unfolded, new details emerged. Witnesses came forward, financial records were examined, and the final damning evidence came in the form of a surveillance image, one Camille had never expected to surface. It wasn't from the night of the murder. It wasn't even from Jamaica. It was an image captured weeks later, in a private banking institution in Zurich. Camille, disguised but unmistakable, had been withdrawing a sizable amount of cash from an account under a fake identity. That was the final proof Interpol needed. A warrant was issued. Camille Sinclair, once untouchable, was now one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. She had been careful, but the world was smaller than she thought. The luxury hotels, the private dinners, the exclusive parties, everywhere she went, there was a record. And now, she wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. Authorities tracked her movements. Paris had been her sanctuary, but she had grown restless. The whispers had started. People were asking questions. She had to keep moving. From Paris, she traveled to Madrid, then to Monaco. Every step, every change of location, was another desperate attempt to stay ahead of the inevitable. But by the time she reached Milan, her time had run out. It happened on a quiet evening outside an upscale boutique. She had just finished an appointment with a personal jeweler, selecting yet another set of diamonds to add to her collection. The store attendant had no idea that the woman standing before him was not who she claimed to be. But the moment she stepped outside, she knew something was wrong. The street was too still. The air, too thick with tension. Then, a voice. Stern. Unwavering. Camille Sinclair. You're under arrest. For the first time since the night of the murder, panic crossed her face. She turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. Officers moved in from all directions. The life she had built, the power she thought she still held, it all shattered in an instant. In the middle of a city where she had once felt untouchable, Camille Sinclair was forced to the ground, her wrists locked in cold steel. The end had finally come. As she was led away, she did not speak. There were no pleas for mercy, no desperate attempts to escape. She had fought for control her entire life, but now, control had been ripped from her grasp. The woman who had once commanded an empire, who had orchestrated the murder of a billionaire, now stood powerless in the custody of the very system she had tried to outsmart. Camille Sinclair was no longer a socialite, no longer a widow, no longer a queen of high society. She was simply an inmate, awaiting her fate. The world watched as Camille Sinclair was extradited back to Jamaica. The cameras flashed, the media swarmed, and the headlines wrote themselves. The woman who once lived a life of luxury was now shackled, her designer wardrobe replaced by a standard-issue prison jumpsuit. But even as she stepped off the transport plane, there was no sign of fear in her eyes, only defiance. She had played this game before, and she wasn't done playing yet. The trial of Camille Sinclair became the spectacle of the decade, a case drenched in betrayal, wealth, and cold-blooded murder. The courtroom was packed every day, the public hanging on to every word, every revelation. And Camille, ever the strategist, knew how to use that attention to her advantage. She entered the courtroom with the same grace she once displayed at charity galas and high society events. She didn't slouch, she didn't break. She met the eyes of the jury with quiet confidence, as if daring them to judge her. Her defense team, a fleet of high-powered attorneys, wasted no time constructing their argument. The story they painted was one of a wronged woman, a grieving widow manipulated by circumstances beyond her control. They pointed fingers at the hitman, at Ava Mendoza, even at Michael himself. A crime of passion, they called it. A tragic mistake fueled by years of emotional abuse. Camille played the role flawlessly, her tears timed to perfection, her voice cracking at just the right moments. But the prosecution came armed with something stronger, evidence. Witness after witness took the stand, unraveling the truth piece by piece. The financial records traced back to Camille. The offshore transactions, the suspicious withdrawals, the wire transfer to the hired gun. Then came the security footage, a grainy but damning video of Camille meeting the hitman weeks before Michael's murder. And finally, the most damning evidence of all, the forensic analysis of Ava Mendoza's phone. A deleted message, recovered by cyber specialists, sent from an anonymous number the night before the murder. The text was short, direct. The plan is set. They'll both be there. That number. It was traced back to Camille's burner phone. The courtroom fell silent. Camille had spent her life controlling every situation, every narrative. But at that moment, she had lost control. The prosecution's closing statement was brutal in its simplicity. This was not an accident. This was not a crime of passion. This was a carefully executed plan, designed by a woman who believed she was untouchable. She thought she could buy silence. She thought she could erase the truth. But today, justice speaks louder than money. As the jury deliberated, Camille sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Minutes passed, then hours, and finally, they returned with their verdict. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a final, resounding note of a symphony Camille had orchestrated herself. For the first time, her composure cracked. Her lips parted slightly, as if to protest, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. The judge did not hesitate in handing down the sentence, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. A punishment fitting for a woman who had spent her life believing she could outmaneuver fate. The cameras captured her final moments in the courtroom. The way her shoulders squared as she stood to be led away. The way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. There was no more audience to impress, no more power to wield. The Queen of Kingston had fallen. As the world moved on, so did those left in the wreckage of her choices. Ava Mendoza, once labeled a murderer, was cleared of all charges and released. But the damage was done. Her career, her reputation, shattered beyond repair. She disappeared from the public eye, leaving behind the scandal that had nearly consumed her. And Michael Sinclair. His legacy became one of caution, rather than admiration. His empire remained, but his name became a warning, a reminder of how power, when abused, can lead to destruction. In the end, Michael's lust for control and Camille's thirst for revenge led them both to the same fate. One buried beneath the ground, the other trapped behind steel bars. A tale of betrayal, greed, and the ultimate price of deception. The courtroom doors closed. The cameras shut off. The headlines faded. But the story of Michael and Camille Sinclair left behind an unforgettable mark, a lesson in power, betrayal, and the consequences of playing a game with no winners. Camille once lived in a world where wealth shielded her from consequences. A world where problems could be buried and truth could be rewritten. But in the end, justice proved to be the one thing she couldn't buy. And yet, one question remains: was justice truly served? Michael Sinclair's life was taken in cold blood, but did Camille Sinclair pay the ultimate price for orchestrating his murder? Or was she simply the final player left standing in a deadly game of deception? Do you think her sentence was enough? Should Ava Mendoza have been held accountable for her role in the unraveling of Michael's life? Or was she just another pawn in Camille's plan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, tales of deception, greed, and the dark truths that lurk behind the lives of the rich and powerful. Subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most shocking true crime cases every week. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.